this council to represent the people of the 8th Ward.
It's not my fault if they don't pay attention, Your Honor.
Right.
And we want to give you that lever, Mr. Mayor.
The main thing is we're getting them back to work, and that's all that counts.
When you invent a new department like the environment and transportation and take out food and shelter, something is wrong with this budget.
This is my day to be slapped in the face. This is the second time it's happened, but let me say that when you're right, victory will prevail. Mr. Mayor, I thank you and the administration.
Local budget making. All across the country, the pressure is on for public officials to make decisions about how our tax dollars are spent. But what taxpayers want, what they get, are not always the same. Ask most people what they want, and they probably say lower taxes and better services. When the 1992 Chicago area budgets were approved, what they got were tax increases and service cutbacks. While the combined $6 billion budgets of the 3 local area governments were very large, they were buying less and less. Taxpayers were hit from all sides, and they weren't very happy about it.
The taxpayers, both business and citizens, are taxed out. Raising current taxes or imposing new ones, such as a Cook County sales tax, will simply drive purchases out of the county. Raising property taxes will have a similar effect, especially on business.
The 3rd largest city in America, Chicago faces the same problems of all big cities: crime, poverty, unemployment, illiteracy. Our tax dollars are meant to address these problems, as well as provide the everyday services we've come to expect. But a poor economy and cutbacks in federal and state funding have made it necessary for local governments to search for new sources of revenue.
On October the 14th, we'll have some new sources of revenue in the budget.
This has been a very pivotal year for Chicago from a financial point of view. We're feeling the effects of the Reagan-Bush cuts. We're feeling the effects of increased costs in government. And it's been unfortunate that the process this year probably has been worse than ever.
At the very moment that people are fed up to their eyeballs with property tax increases, we are faced with opening new jails and new healthcare facilities. It is the old story of an irresistible force meeting an immovable object.
Much of the revenue local governments once depended on has all but dried up. At the same time, we've seen the end of general revenue sharing and cutbacks in federal grant and state taxes. Local officials are faced with a number of expensive federal and state mandates.
Now I find myself in a position where I'm the one who has to figure out how to pay the bills for a criminal justice system that is bursting at the seams. I'm the one who has to figure out where to find the money to open a new hospital when the property taxpayers are on the verge of revolt. This is not an easy job.
But the loss of outside funding is only one thing causing fiscal distress to local governments. Add to this a painfully long and stubborn recession, and the flight of the middle class out of the city, taking with them a strong tax base. What's left is an increasingly more impoverished population, and less money to provide the services they desperately need. Things like housing, education, police protection, health care, and transportation. What does this mean for the people we elect into office? Simply, it means they must do more with less. That's easier said than done. Compounding this lack of money are problems with the budget process itself. In Chicago, the flaws of governmental budgeting hold true for the city, the county, and the transportation authority. While our elected officials should be spending what tax dollars they have for the people, too often other priorities seem to dominate.
And that's what the people of the city of Chicago pay us to provide as service.
We are facing tough times, and so are the people who live and work here and pay their taxes every year. In order to serve them better and keep Chicago advancing, we have to make tough decisions. And that's what this budget is about. In a word, it's about change. It's about rethinking what government can do to give people what they deserve for their tax dollars, concentrating on those functions it can do best, and doing them more efficiently.
Mayor Daley called his 1992 bad news budget a wake-up call, jolting the bureaucracy by demanding better accountability from City Hall. Proposing the first budget decrease since 1984, Daley was forced to do some pretty serious belt-tightening. First, he froze hiring and eliminated overtime. Next, he reduced spending and privatized city services, like custodial work at police headquarters, sewer repair and cleaning, and servicing housing department loans. Entire departments were reorganized or eliminated. The result? 1,200 city employees out of work.
Most importantly, through these layoffs and reorganizations, we'll have the money we need to pay for the one thing the people of Chicago care about the most, and that is public safety. That's why under the 1992 budget, the police department is hiring over 400 civilians to free up and even more sworn officers for street duty. All told, we plan to have over 1,000 more police officers on the street next year.
But not everybody liked what they heard.
We want to see the City Council pass amendments to the budget that will restore some of the budget cuts so that fewer people will be laid off. It doesn't make sense to hire people off the street when you've got qualified, dedicated, experienced employees who are being laid off and could fill those jobs, that many of which they're qualified to hold.
Daley's cuts still wouldn't make up for a $74 million revenue shortfall, and the obligation to maintain current services, not to mention add new ones. Nor did it include an inevitable pay raise for city employees. According to the mayor's budget director, those raises could cost taxpayers $11 million for every 1% increase. So once again, the responsibility to generate revenue was placed in the hands of the taxpayers. In addition to higher property taxes, Chicagoans were asked to pay more for water and sewer, vehicle stickers, out-of-state phone services, and big-ticket items bought outside of the city. But with those tax increases came sharp cuts in city services. Cuts ranging from reduced library hours at the city's branch libraries to the elimination of free dental care for adults treated at city health care clinics. During the budget debate, Larry Bloom, alderman from the 5th Ward, voiced concern about the effect Daley's budget might have on the city's residents.
I think we're suffering from the fact that we have a high degree of unemployment, especially in our minority communities, and I really didn't see any focus by the mayor in dealing with that issue, both in terms of economic development and in terms of giving people jobs, and also in helping to relieve the despair that we find in our neighborhoods.
A number of Chicago's aldermen were shocked by Daley's budget message. But on November 22nd, 1991, his budget was approved without any major amendments or changes from those proposed by either alderman or citizens.
If we aren't going to get payment for the services we perform that are mandated by the state, then we're going to have to go back to our taxpayers. But let me tell you something. We are not going to put more burden on the property tax. It's a bad, lousy, awful tax, and we got to get off of it.
Residents of Cook County were also asked to dig deeper in their pockets and get less for their efforts. Public safety and health care were the forces that drove the county budget. President Richard Phelan and his commissioners were faced with the challenge of running a criminal justice system and a health care system primarily with local government revenues.
We are faced with opening and finishing the construction of 3 jails, and we are under court order to do this. We have no alternative based on the fact that we've gotten next to no money from the state of Illinois under its own mandates to fund all of these operations.
The Cook County Board began its budget process with a $184 million revenue shortfall. When Phelan presented his austerity plan, he announced crackdowns on things like cost overruns, workmen's compensation, and pension funds. He also renegotiated employee health care benefits and eliminated 3% of the county's workforce. Many of these positions came from reputed patronage havens such as Cook County Hospital, the Forest Preserve, and the Highway Department. Some of the commissioners expressed their concern about Phelan's cuts.
There's a possibility that we'll have to cut a lot of people from the payroll, and those people usually come from the lower end of the social economic totem pole, and those are the people who will have to go on the welfare systems in that area. So I am concerned.
In his message, Phelan indicated that it grieved him to lay off 497 workers and freeze 771 jobs. But some commissioners questioned Phelan's freeze, calling it the freeze that melted.
It's a complete contradiction of what he's telling the people of Cook County. He's saying that there's a freeze as far as new employees, and he's requesting new employees in the budget. And they're asking people to be, other people being laid off, or a 4-day work week. I think that's wrong. If you're going to have a freeze, it should be a freeze. And here we are in Cook County trying to create new positions for new programs that the people of Cook County are being overtaxed for to begin with.
The new positions referred to by Commissioner Lekowitz were those proposed by the creation of an Ethics Commission and the Human Rights Commission at a cost of nearly $700,000.
What Mr. Phelan has done here is created a situation where he now envisions government to be similar to a large corporation. And instead of promoting people from within, he's brought in a tremendous infrastructure of management at high-priced salaries at the top.
Phelan's increase in spending left a $73 million shortfall.
That I report that the only way to fund our jails, provide for the safety of our citizens, and balance the budget this year is to use the $73 million in revenue obtained from reassessments. It was another tough choice.
While Phelan's budget didn't call for any new taxes, it did propose a number of fee increases. He also warned the revenue honeymoon would soon be over and the likelihood of a county sales tax just around the corner. By the spring of 1992, he indeed proposed a new county sales tax.
Every day the train stops and slows down, coming or going, you know. I took the train this morning, it slowed down. Yesterday it did, the day before. On the way back that I was coming, the train was slowed down because they're working on it for the past 2 years. I mean, how much money are they spending on repairs that are taking over 2 years? You know, somebody's not getting the job done.
Ask anyone who uses public transportation in Chicago and they'll probably agree. It's noisy, crowded, slow, and dirty. It's also inefficient, unsafe, and unreliable. In a recent poll, 57% of Chicagoans rated CTA services worse than any other agency except public housing. But declining support from the tax base, together with higher operating costs, resulted in the necessity for the CTA to squeeze more revenue from their riders. And with this increase came service cutbacks.
The other day I waited a half hour for an elevator at the B station. It's a shame. You have to raise the fare and then you have lousy service.
The 1992 CTA budget is $40 million higher than last year's budget. Yet agency officials claimed it was $50 million short of what was needed just to maintain current services. To avoid an impending fiscal crisis, the CTA discontinued or reduced service on train and bus routes throughout the city. But they also raised fares by as much as 20%.
Fare raises and service cuts reduce ridership and revenue. It's a downward spiral which, once begun, will quickly destroy one of our most valuable public assets, the public transit system. And I think riders are finding that the CTA and the RTA on their own are not responsive to their demands.
But the belt-tightening didn't reach the top in 1991. In fact, more than 300 CTA employees received raises of more than 10%. Some claim that years of administrative excess have soaked up the funds the CTA believes it needs to operate.
I think the raises are scandalous and stupid. But we're talking about salaries at the CTA that go up to $150,000. These executives can afford to defer the salary increases until the CTA is in a healthier condition than it is now.
Who's pocketing the money? That's all I want to know.
3 scenarios. 3 different budget-making bodies, all making decisions about who will pay for and who will benefit from government services. Is the current policy followed by Chicago area governments one that raises taxes and cuts services, the best one for its citizens, more and more of whom need those services but have no means to pay for them? Some don't think so. In fact, many in the Chicago area believe their voices are not being heard. A series of public opinion polls conducted by the University of Illinois at Chicago revealed that 81% of Chicagoans think that the city should spend more money on the poor and homeless. The majority of those people even said they would be willing to pay higher taxes for the services. Yet in 1992, the poor took a pretty severe blow.
If we saw a 7% reduction in the amount of money that the city gives us, which is combined city, state, and federal monies, it would mean that we would be open fewer hours during the day or be able to offer fewer services to the people that come to our door looking for help. We're really holding our breaths as of April when the general assistance cuts go into effect. There could be thousands more people on the streets in Chicago looking for shelter.
Just how much input does the average citizen have when it comes to budget decisions and government accountability? You look at the process followed by Chicago, Cook County, and the CTA, it appears that the answer is very little. Is it any wonder, then, that 39% of Chicagoans don't feel they're receiving a fair share of services in return for the taxes they pay? Or that they feel that some neighborhoods are more equal than others?
The 49th Ward ranks last among the 50 wards in projected spending for the next 5 years. Under the proposed budget, the 49th Ward will receive only $4 million in capital spending. In contrast, the 42nd Ward will receive over $58 million. I believe that we're the victims of benign neglect and of a budget planning process that fails to adequately take into account the needs of many of Chicago's neighborhoods.
Why is it that decisions that hit us in our pockets are made with so little input from the very people those decisions affect? A large part of the problem rests with the budget process itself. The lack of data and reports explaining how money is being spent, a legislative body with little input, and the combination of legal deadlines and institutional planning that do not include public participation.
Well, right now, the way the City of Chicago operates its budget process, we follow basically the minimum standards required by state statute. We have a budget out by November 15th. We have to adopt it by December 31st. There has to be one public hearing. Often that public hearing comes after all the testimony is in, so that the public hearing is irrelevant. And we have perfunctory votes and we adopt the budget.
Taxpayers want to see something for their money. And more than ever before, they're demanding the right to have input into the budget process. But to do so, they need a lot more information than they're currently getting.
An individual citizen is able to find out only so much information about any given issue, and then all of the doors are closed. And it seems as though if you are not a member of their secret society, there's just no information available.
The public will never have effective input without access to information about how government operates. But as it stands, documents on spending, revenue generation, and audited performance are impossible to get. It seems even our public officials aren't privy to that information.
I think we need opportunities during the year to evaluate how the city's budget is going, to determine whether the revenues that we expected are actually coming in, whether we are holding the line on the expenditures as we dictated in our spending plan, and whether we are getting productivity out of city workers. I think the new budget director testified at her confirmation hearing that she didn't think it was necessarily the prerogative of the city council to get involved in those priority-making decisions that come in mid-year. I think those kind of decisions are precisely the kinds of things the city council should be involved in.
The majority of the committee members felt that the budget was a continuation document that goes all year long, where the different department comes down for different requests, amendments, and changes within that budget. And at that particular time, when they come down, the budget committee members gets a chance to ask questions.
Each particular government has its own accounting systems. They play shell games with them. They don't have any standardized ways of disclosing data.
Taxpayers also expect and deserve responsible leadership from those they elect.
I know what I have to do, and that is, on the day that this budget is called, I will propose my amendments, and I will call it exactly how it is, on behalf of people, including myself, who are paying tax bills. And if it's 16-1, it will be 16-1.
One of the benefits of living in a democracy is the power of the vote. But what good is that privilege if those we elect can't really represent us? Most assume that these people play a sort of check and balance role, monitoring governmental efficiency. But instead, local officials are often accused of being little more than rubber stamps, deferring to executive budget decisions.
The CTA board job is one of the cushiest in the city. It's essentially a meeting a month, doing what the chairman and the executive director of the agency tell you.
Once local budgets are formulated, all our officials can do is offer amendments. But most amendments are voted down, even those on the most volatile of issues. Like the decision to approve a 29-year franchise for Commonwealth Edison, an agreement that had major implications for franchise fees, taxes, and utility rates. The agreement was complicated by ComEd's refusal to adopt the city's affirmative action plan.
We are going to vote no on what Alderman Eisendrath has proposed today because it is ignorant, stupid, disgraceful, and an insult.
What you're doing here is sentencing blacks and Hispanics and all other minorities in this town, including women, to a life of economic deprivation.
The affirmative action issue was fiercely debated on the council floor. But in the end, the Commonwealth Edison franchise was voted through without requiring affirmative action in hiring.
One of the reasons our local officials are relegated to a reactive stance in budget making is that they lack appropriate staff with the expertise to advise them and help them govern well. Most of our local government officials go it alone, even though they may not necessarily have the expertise to function in that capacity. But if our legislators have little input, taxpayers have even less. Real citizen involvement means input at the front end, when change is still possible.
If the mayor really cared, I think, for the average community resident in this city and really opened up the process and asked for our input and our priorities way before he put together his draft budget, then perhaps it might make a difference.
Even though they pay the bills for local government, most citizens seldom show up at public hearings, even when they are well publicized. This is especially true of Cook County.
Yesterday, we had a public hearing on an increase of $74 million in a levy for Cook County. One person in 5 million came before this board to testify. That's a tragedy.
One of the major reasons for this lack of participation stems from the frustration that the few opportunities for public input are too little, too late. Unlike Cook County, many citizens did step forward to react to Daley's budget.
Why should I move? I'm the tax base.
But by the time their voices were heard, the important decisions were already made and the budget all but finalized. And those who did testify faced apparent indifference.
I think voters and citizens are so angry at their government because they feel out of control. And government has brought this upon itself because it's made it nearly impossible for ordinary people to understand where their tax dollars are going, how we are using our accumulated shared public wealth for the betterment of all of us.
Many believe it's time for reform. Local governments could start by issuing documents showing how tax dollars are spent. These documents should include geographical data broken down by ward, neighborhood, or community. Individual program reports which include cost per unit, cost benefit, and audited performance data so that the public can measure both efficiency and productivity. In addition, individual departments should develop long-range plans forecasting both spending and revenue generation. Budget years should be coordinated and budget formats standardized so that data can be compared between governments. Complete audits of these financial reports should be available and open to public scrutiny before the executive budget is finalized. In an effort to hold our elected officials accountable, legislative committees should hold public mid-year and end-of-year hearings to determine how effectively government is operating. And to help local officials govern well, Qualified staff should be appointed to analyze budgets and programs. More than anything else, taxpayers want opportunities to have their voices heard. The creation of little city halls and other public forums with regularly scheduled meetings between elected officials and their constituencies would give citizens the opportunity to voice their concerns.
We look at the 90s as the decade of decision. It's time to get our act together in our cities if we really want to save them.
Chances are Chicago will continue to face serious budget obstacles. Reforming the budget process won't solve the big problems like cutbacks in federal and state funding. But what it might do is make the process more open and accessible to those people whose lives will be affected. This year, the public didn't get a full voice in budget decisions. But the pressure for reform and change to make government for the people continues to increase.
The question is, in the long run, how long will people continue to put up with the current system?
The people will remember what we do here today. Now, you can think you can do it, and they won't remember, but they will remember.
The legacy of the 1992 budget process will be with us into the 21st century.
And I received calls from my constituents, but I sat down with them and I spoke to them truthfully and from the heart. And when a public servant does that, Mr. President, he gains the support of his constituency and is returned to this city council and to any other public body.
The citizenry have lost confidence, have lost faith in government. I also think that one of the responsibilities of government is to respond to the will of the people.
There is no limit to the good you can do in this body. And when members of this council vote, and if they vote to separate this affirmative action piece, they're going to split the city right down the middle.
To order publications on citizen participation in budget making, call the Office of Social Science Research at the University of Illinois at Chicago, 312-996-6439.